Hi, my name is Tyler, and this is the Fox Valley Film Critics. In this special 50th episode of the show, we're going to be dedicating 2 segments to discussing Lord of the Rings. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the show, brought to you by Groupthink Productions and FVTV. We started the Fox Valley Film Critics 2 years ago on this channel, and as I was looking towards this year and realizing that we were reaching our 50th episode, I wanted to do something special. And lo and behold, it just so turned out that the movies that were correlating with the AFI's Top 100 American Films 50th spot were the Lord of the Rings trilogies. And obviously, when I was going back and watching them, I realized that we needed to have a deeper discussion about these films because these films have a very unique spot in the history of contemporary blockbuster filmmaking. In order to do that, I'd felt that we needed another segment beyond just talking about Peter Jackson's adaptations. So we're going to be dedicating an entire segment, the first half of the show, just to talking about J.R.R. Tolkien and the books. And in order to do that, I reached out to a very special professor from the University of Chicago, Professor Rachel Fulton Brown. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, tell us a little about your position in the University of Chicago.
I'm an associate professor in the Department of History, and I teach the history of Christianity. I specialize in devotion to the Virgin Mary, prayer, liturgy, scriptural exegesis, but I also every 3 years teach a course on Tolkien, medieval and modern. If your viewers are interested in following along with that course, there's a blog for it called tolkienmedievalandmodern.blogspot.com, and you can see a number of the comments that my students have made over several sessions on the major topics that we'll be talking about today, I hope.
Yes. What brought that class about, and why do you do it every 3 years?
Well, I do it every 3 years because that fits with my teaching schedule, but it also, I think it's also appropriate because it's a book that I've been reading. I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was 11, which if you guys want to do the math, that was a while ago. And I've reread it every 2 or 3 years ever since. It's a book that I think, well, when I have the students sign up for the class, there is one prerequisite for the course, which they must have read The Lord of the Rings before they take the course. Most of them have read it more than once before they take it. I do have a few newbies that come in and have only read it over spring break before the class starts. But it's a book that everybody rereads, or at least certainly the people that are in my class do. And one of the reasons that I came to teaching the course is I wanted to understand why I kept rereading it. It's like, what is it about The Lord of the Rings that makes it that kind of book that you go back to over and over and over again? I mean, if people who only read it once, like E.O. Wilson, who was, like, oh, those awful orcs, right? There are many critics who do not like The Lord of the Rings, and it's to a large extent because they come to it expecting a novel, right? And what they find is something rather different. And of course, one of the things that I do in the course is try to figure out what it is. Why is this book different from other books? Why is it the kind of book that makes you want to come back and keep rereading it regularly over the course of your life? So I teach it every 3 years because it gives me the opportunity to do that.
Sure. I mean, I've only just started reading these books for the first time recently because I didn't. Yeah, it's lovely and romantic, and
bless you. We'll have fun.
I mean, I'm reading all the books that they didn't teach me when they didn't learn me right in school. So.
Well, and I can explain why you needed to have read it before.
Although I did start with the Silmarillion, so that was a bit of a trip.
Good.
Which I know that's chronologically that's accurate, but. I don't know if you're supposed to read Hobbit or Lord of the Rings first, just because obviously those are the popular ones. But.
Well, this is one of the things that we talk about in the class. It's like, how do you get inside the stories, right? And one of the great concepts that Tolkien develops in his it's in the background. You have to look for it. I show you this in the course. Is this concept of an elf friend? Right, when Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin first meet the elves when they're still in the Shire, right? They greet them as elf friend, and it's like, what does that mean? What is an elf friend? And it's in Tolkien's storytelling world, it's the one that can mediate between fairy and the normal world, fairy and the sort of comfortable bourgeois life that the hobbits have in Hobbiton. So that you started with the Silmarillion, and you're already starting in fairy, right? You're already starting in the world that we want to have access to, but most people like starting with The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings because they like starting with the hobbits as the storytellers. And so I have my props. If you look at the title page to The Lord of the Rings, they're the runes on the top and the bottom, and they're the runes, and then the Tegwin that is the Elvish script, right? But it's in English, right? And it's basically saying this is the book that Bilbo wrote, and that Frodo continued, and it's the story the hobbits tell of being in their adventure. So you need the hobbits there as your mediators, your elf friends, to bring you into the world of fairy.
Sure. So let's kind of jump into the books. So I want to start talking kind of about the roots of Lord of the Rings and the roots of all the Tolkien, what do you call it, the Middle Earth saga or the legendarium?
Right. His legendarium, his Silmarillion.
Yes.
Well, the Silmarillion. So he wanted originally to have the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings published together, and he wrote a great letter. I have these are the books that you actually need most. You need the Lord of the Rings. You need his letters, right? And the letters are his backstory. It's the explanation that he gave to his children, to his friends, to his editor, about what he thought he was doing in the stories. And letter 131 to Milton Waldman was when he was pitching the story to say, this is what I wanted to do. And in that letter, that's one of the most famous letters, where he explains what he thought he was up to. And this is in fact you're taking me places I didn't plan to go. That's okay. That what he felt was that what he wanted to do was write what he called a mythology for England, right? And in this sense, he was following on his scholarship as a philologist and a student of Old English, right? And that he'd found what he thought were word clues in the Old English to stories that had been lost. One of the great word clues is the name, which he thinks it's a name, it's a title, Arendelle, right? It's in a poem called The Christ of Cynewulf. And the phrase that he had was, "Hail, Arendelle, brightest of angels, over Middle Earth to men sent." It's meant to be, it seems to be a story about an angel and the advent of the God-man, right? The advent of Christ. But Tolkien says that Arendelle, it doesn't really fit anywhere. It's nothing that I actually know what means. I need to find out what that means. And by way of following that little trace in what he thought was the sort of ancient language, he thought he could find the mythology that had been lost. And what he told Milton Waldman when he was pitching the Silmarillion and the Lord of the Rings together was this: do not laugh. But yeah.
That's a good start.
Well, he's gonna get a bit grand, right? But once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story. The larger founded on the lesser in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country. It should possess the tone and quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, be redolent of our air, the clime and soil of the Northwest, meaning Britain and the hither parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less the East. And while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in genuine ancient Celtic things, it should be high, purged of the gross, and fit for the more adult mind of a land now long steeped in poetry. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd. But no, he's being totally serious there, right? And he's like the number of parenthetical clauses he puts in there. It's not this, but it's this, but it's this. But what he's saying is, and it fits with a kind of 19th century romanticizing of where mythologies come from, that they're associated with the particular land that they're written in. So it's our climate, our Northwest, that it has a sort of elusive beauty, like some people call Celtic, but it's not really Celtic. It should be high, and that's what he thought with the elven stuff, right? It should be the sort of sublimity of the beauty of those stories, but still adult and so forth. And what I use in the class, which is very important, that he had this sense that there was this majestic whole that others could participate in, that they could bring their own.
Ignore that. The chicken will handle it.
Okay, creativity. So, you know, there's the hobbits there, right? They're just going to come in and squawk at us and bring it down to the ordinary, right? Which, as I was saying with the elf friend, it's one of his great gifts that he's able to work on all of these different levels of style. But that leaving scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama. And I think that fits to the other part of the thing that you want us to talk about is where Peter Jackson's movies come into it, right? That's sort of premised in Tolkien's desire to have a legendarium that others could work within.
Sure. I mean, we can hold off the Peter Jackson to the second part, but
sure.
For now, I just want to talk about Tolkien. And one of the interesting things about Tolkien is his use of language and the way he's crafted multiple languages for the legendarium.
Right.
Where does that come from specifically for him, and what role does that came in shaping the universe, do you think?
Well, so some of it is this sense that he has a relationship between, as I was saying, those words that he found that were clues that he thought were pointing him to these lost stories. There's a great scholar of Tolkien, Tom Shippey, he's done a pair of books, one, The Author of the Century and The Road to Middle-earth. And he talks in those about what he calls the philologist's asterisk reality, that a philologist will find a word like arendal or orc, right? That's one of them. Giants, ints, right? The ints that Tolkien has a long footnote in one of his letters. I won't be able to find that one, where he talks about how he has this word int in Old English, and it means giant, and so he's then trying to figure out what it means, and he says that those name clues, those word clues sort of give to him this whole story. Professor Shippey explains that that's the way philologists work in terms of the structure of language, that you go back from the forms you find in present spoken languages or written languages, and by certain scientific principles and understandings of phonetics and so forth, posit root words, right? So what Tolkien is doing with his stories is in fact positing an asterisk reality that the words came from, right? So he understands that very closely. So that's one way that he's working. The other is that he describes in one of his essays, English and Welsh, how he loved simply the sounds of words, right? That he thought of his creation of his own languages, the Elvish languages, and he does a little bit with some things he calls man languages, the Númenórean languages, that he understood them as like musical compositions, right? That he could hear the phonemes. He had particular phonemes that he says people tend to find beautiful, and his languages are therefore both historical investigations and something like a musical composition. One of his favorite examples of a phoneme that just sounds beautiful but doesn't really have a significant sense is cellar door, which he says just the l and the d and the r. And so if you get that, you say the Lord of the Rings is actually in its phonemes the most perfect title that he could have given to his works, because it has that phonetic beauty to it in as you speak it.
Fascinating. I mean, I hadn't thought of that, but that's interesting. I did want to kind of tie this around to his faith, given that that's such a huge aspect of his work. Obviously, the concept of the word and the concept of the spoken word is a huge idea within Christendom. There's the idea of, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was of God, and how, I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought for a second. But Tolkien's religion is clearly one of the most important aspects of his work, and that clearly comes back into the philosophy that behind the work, his general Catholic pessimism, his ideas about intergenerational conflict. And I'm going to have you answer that as soon as we get back from our break. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back. Now to jump into the question I rudely had to cut off. So,
It's good. It gave me time to contemplate and find my references, right? So first, you started with this idea that Tolkien's pessimistic. He isn't, right? As a Christian, he's ultimately hopeful. It feels like pessimism because the stories are set before the incarnation. And one of the things that he was adamant about is he did not want his stories to be as famously allegory, right? That he says he prefers history to allegory. And so for him, they're set in a very specific time period. They're set in that historic past that he's projecting we can have access to through the language. But they feel pessimistic because, as he explained to one of his Catholic friends, what he wanted to do by way of these stories was, quote, make visible and physical the effects of sin or misused free will by men. You said you started with the Silmarillion. The story of the Silmarillion is ultimately hopeful because Arendelle shows up and saves Middle-earth by way of making an appeal to the gods, right? But it's pessimistic in the sense that Fëanor, having made the Silmarils, holds that chicken needs to do its work. Holds on to them rather than being willing to sacrifice them to save the trees, right? You remember all that, right?
There's a lot happens in Silmarillion.
So, well, one of the themes that we take on in my course is understanding the significance of free will and the greediness of holding on to one's precious, to one's creation. For Fëanor, the Silmarils are his precious, and he will not let go of them. And in being unwilling to let go of them, you see the fall. And it's like that's why the elves end up, in Middle-earth in the war with Morgoth, and that's what Arendelle eventually has to plead with the Valar to save them from, right? So it's pessimistic only in the sense that it's before the incarnation, but after a fall, right? And so you're watching the effects of sin. You're watching the effects of what happens. On the other hand, Tolkien, as a Catholic, was very, very hopeful, and there's a wonderful letter, this is 310, to his publisher's daughter, who had been given a student project to write and ask, what is the purpose of life? And Tolkien goes through this thing. This question only makes sense if you actually understand that there is actually a creator. The purpose of life is actually rather different. He says, it may be said that the chief purpose of life for any one of us, if we actually accept the reality of the Creator, is to increase according to our capacity, our knowledge of God, by all the means we have, and to be moved by it to praise and thanks, to do as we say in the Gloria in Excelsis, Laudamus te, benedicamus te, adoramus te, glorificamus te, gratias agimus tibi propter magnum gloriam tuam. We praise you, we call you holy, we worship you, we proclaim your glory, we thank you for the greatness of your splendor. So keeping those two things in mind, that's the mystery of his books, right? On the one hand, the recognition of the sin and of the fall and of sin, and on the other, of the participation in creativity and God's creation by way of our praise through our own works of art.
All right. So jumping into the topic of the films, we've talked about language and the philosophy behind these. How do you think these translate to Peter Jackson's films?
Well, he misses all of what I just told you.
Oops.
Which is a problem, right? So I'd say one of the things that's interesting, of course Peter Jackson wanted to make films because he's responding to Tolkien's invitation. Right, he's responding to the invitation to make still in the image in which we are made. Although I don't know Jackson's faith, I don't know where he's coming from, but Tolkien, he wrote a great poem that is sometimes credited with helping Lewis convert to Christianity and then write his own fantasy stories. And this was a part of the poem. And this invitation to creativity is very important. Through all the crannies of the world, though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sow the seeds of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused, the right has not decayed, we make still by the law in which we're made. So it's our right to actually want to make things, to make beautiful things, to make things like rings and stories and movies, yes. and it's our right whether we use it or misuse it. It's always there. We make still by the law in which we're made. We're made in the image and likeness of a maker as human beings, and our response to God is to want to make beautiful things ourselves, right? And the elves do that. The hobbits make modest things, right? But they also make beautiful things. And the misuse of that beauty is what's the great tragedy, right? That we're called to creativity, and then we become possessive of the things that we've made.
Sure. So you would you say you like the movies overall, or do you think that they mistreat Tolkien's canon too badly?
So aesthetically, I think they respond beautifully to Tolkien. I mean, when you first see them, and you're not like having memorized the book by having read it every third year since you were 11. So I did not come to the movies fresh, right? I came to the movies having reread the book many times. That aesthetically, I think Jackson did a magnificent job, right? The costumes, the sets, the casting, the music, it's all very much of, I think, Tolkien's imagining. Although, I mean, Tolkien went back and forth, I think, in terms of whether or not he thought it was possible to make visible his stories. That on the one hand, I mean, he was a linguist, right? He's a philologist. He loved the sense of the words, and he wanted those words there. So when you're reading the books, you can have this sense that everything's very richly described, but if you pay attention, you realize that the adjectives are quite simple, right? Things are blue, they're gold, they're white, right? They're not, even sapphire necessarily. They're, or carbuncle, or smaragdian or something like that. He uses very plain language, and you fill in all of that ornament and beauty and so forth. That he thought that was a better way for people to experience the stories necessarily than having someone draw it for them. But on the other hand, he was an artist himself, right? So there's an exhibit that just opened in New York of his drawings.
I'm actually going to be going to that.
Very good, right? And his drawings are, they're in a very early 20th century sort of poster style. I mean, so his Art Deco kind of poster style, very plain and simple. I don't know whether he would have liked the visualization that Jackson gave, but I did, right? I think Jackson caught that part of it well.
Sure.
But.
Yeah, big but.
But what did he do wrong? Well, one, he misunderstands this problem of free will, right? And misunderstands the problem of choice. And the most significant scene in that respect is when Frodo and Sam have gotten in the boat to get back, to go to Mordor by themselves. And Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas are left trying to figure out what to do, right? Do they go after the hobbits whom the orcs have taken, or do they go after Frodo and Sam? And Aragorn in the book has a great struggle with whether or not he can make the right choice, right? And you recognize that he needs to make that choice. He's just passed by the great statues of his ancestors, and he's being drawn into this sort of kingly role. And the first thing he does is, does he make the right choice? Can he make the right choice? He talks frequently through that episode with, Gimli. I think it's Gimli. It says to him, we need you to make some decision. He's like, you give the choice to a bad chooser, right? And in the script that Jackson used, Aragorn kind of says, oh, they've chosen their path, now we need to choose ours. It's like, no. It's much more of a crisis for Aragorn, and Jackson completely misses that. He also, I think, underplays a similar moment that Sam has to make a choice in, and the chapter in the book that scene's taken from is called the Choices of Master Samwise, and all of those words are very significant. One, that it's Sam's full name. It's not just Sam, right? He's now master because Frodo is dead, stunned, spider food, who knows, right? Taken by the orcs. And Sam is he's not taken by the orcs yet. Sam is trying to figure out what to do. And in that moment, he becomes master because he has to decide. And the choice that he has to make is, does he make the right choice or not? And we know he does because he saves the ring from being captured. But on the other hand, in his own mind, he makes the wrong choice because that was not his right role. His right role was not be master, but servant. So Frodo is master, he's servant Sam, and then you realize that's Tolkien's Christianity like bursting through yet again, that our proper role is as servant of God, not master. And so I'm like I said, I don't know what Jackson's faith is, but I don't see in the script the sensitivity to all of those theological layers in the way that they wrote it.
I mean, from my understanding of Peter Jackson, having seen the 20 hours of special features on the DVDs, I get the sense that the movie versions could probably be understood as a secular reading on The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, oh, yes.
So
Yes.
I feel I need to push back slightly in regards to the degradation of the films, but from where I'm coming from, I saw them first, obviously, and I was kind of too young to get either the books or the film versions to really have a full understanding of what I was watching the first time.
Right.
But it's really opened up to me as I've gone back and looked at them multiple times. Like, obviously, I'll admit that the books are superior. They're far more genteel than I expected them to be.
How do you
which
mean
is-
genteel?
They're very like storybook-esque. They're not quite as gross and violent as the movies are, which
Right.
is clearly an aspect of Peter Jackson's filmmaking, given that he was a horror director before he made Lord of the Rings. But I think that it is worth saying that I would vehemently defend the movies, if only just because I know that the comment section is going to eat me alive if I don't. But
Well,
But beyond
I
that,
invite
beyond that.
everyone to come and read on the blog. Let's talk about Tom Bombadil a little bit.
Good luck with that.
Well, no, the thing is that as I said, that one of the most important things that you have to understand is what Tolkien is trying to do is get you inside a story frame, right? And this is, you say, why do I teach this class? Well, I think, I started with this, like, people reread this book over and over and over again. Why do they reread this book over and over and over again? Why do you keep rewatching the movies? Why are they going to eat us alive in the comments section? Because you want to be inside the story. Right? You
Yeah.
want to be inside the story. And so do Sam and Frodo, right? Sam says, I wonder what sort of a tale we've fallen into. I wonder, said Frodo, but I don't know. And that's the way of a real tale. Take any one that you're fond of. You may know or guess what kind of tale it is, happy ending or sad ending, but the people in it don't know, and you don't want them to. No, sir, of course not. Notice the sir there, right? Servant master. Baron now. He never thought he was going to get that Silmaril from the Iron Crown in Thangorodrim, and yet he did, and that was a worse place and a blacker danger than ours. But that's a long tale, of course, and goes on past the happiness and into grief and beyond it. And the Silmaril went on and came to Arendelle. And why, sir, I never thought of that before. You've got some of the light of it in that star glass that the lady gave you. Why, to think of it, we're in the same tale still. It's still going on. It's still going on. Don't the great tales never end? No, they never end as tales, said Frodo, but the people in them come and go when their part's ended. Our part will end sooner or later. Later or sooner. And then we can have some rest and some sleep, said Sam. He laughed grimly. And I mean just that, Mr. Frodo. I mean plain, ordinary rest and sleep and waking up to a morning's work in the garden. I'm afraid that's all I'm hoping for all the time. All the big important plans are not for my sort. Still, I wonder if we shall ever be put into songs or tales. We're in one, of course, but I mean put into words, told by the fireside or read out of a great big book with red and black letters, years and years afterwards, and people will say, let's hear about Frodo and the Ring. And they'll say, yes, that's one of my favorite stories. Frodo was very brave, wasn't he, Dad? Yes, my boy, the famousest of the hobbits, and that's saying a lot. Now, notice what he's just done there, right? He has taken you through the entire story of the Silmarillion into the story of the Lord of the Rings and told you it's going to become a tale, right? You're in the story. You want to be in the story. That's what Tolkien is trying to do, put you inside the same story. What story are we in? Well, this story, it's the Silmarils have become a star. The star is the light in the heavens. It's captured in Galadriel's glass. It's there with them in the depths of the earth. That's a Christian story. Right? And that's what Tolkien is doing over and over and over again. He is showing you that we are in the same tale still. And what is that story?
Sure.
Do you know? What story are we in? What's the greatest fairy story ever told?
I don't know what answer you're trying to provoke, but
In the beginning was the Word.
well, you brought it full circle. Good. Slow clap for clever. I think I'll end this on a point I've kind of come to in regards to Tolkien and the movies, is that if there's one thing that kind of bothers me about the films is that the way they've exposed the culture to Tolkien is both good and bad in a really fascinating way. One being that he's a much larger name now than he probably would have been before, at least in terms of the mass culture, but the one thing that's kind of bothered me about it is the way that they've kind of set his name and kind of cast him in bronze as like this almost accessible person. And one of the things I've liked going back and reading the books is that they're extremely personal and they're extremely nostalgic and emotional. And I don't think the one thing that the the movies, I like them a lot. I will defend them, but they're action movies. They're modern blockbuster action movies, and they're the best. They're to me, they're the best kind of modern action movies in that they're clearly personable by people who care about it, and they're taking their time to make it. But they make Tolkien seem inaccessible, and that's the only problem I really have with them as art.
The action part. Well, so the Lord of the Rings. You didn't ask me about The Hobbit. The Hobbit went okay. The dragon's great, but The Hobbit went much too far in turning them into action movies.
Well, yes, those are different completely. But
right.
I'm sorry, I'm at the end, but I appreciate you for coming on. This has been a great conversation.
Well, we can always talk more.
Sure. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Fox Valley Film Critics. If you want to follow me on Twitter and talk about all of the horrible opinions we've expressed, you can follow me at Antisocial Crit-Eye, and she has a Twitter too. Do you want to plug it, or?
Oh, certainly. So I'm at R. Fulton Brown. I'm also Fencing Bear at Prayer is my own blog, and you can read some of my even more controversial topics there. Notorious.
You can read my written reviews at Geeks Under Grace and Legal Insurrection, and you can find past recordings of the show on our YouTube page, Group Think Productions. I'm Tyler with the Fox Valley Film Critics. Have a wonderful day.